Hello, I'm Linda Bourne. I'm a former first grade teacher, a farm wife, an author, and for the past 10 years I've been the primary caregiver for my mother who has Alzheimer's disease. This presentation is from a talk originally given in September of 2013. The audience was a small home extension unit from Kansas, a group of older women who had each seen loved ones suffer from Alzheimer's disease and were frightened of the possibility of a diagnosis of dementia for themselves. They asked about the books I'd written, but I understood their main concern was dread of Alzheimer's. And so I gave just a brief introduction to my books and moved quickly to prevention strategies, planning for the future, and methods of coping with the discomfort of fear of dementia. If you are reading this, I assume your life has been touched by Alzheimer's or related dementias. My heart goes out to you, and I pray that the topics covered in this presentation provide you hope through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. This opening slide features photos of my grandson that I thought were in keeping with the idea that both an Alzheimer patient and her caregiver can continue to have a high quality of life after a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. This fits well with the message that's at the heart of my caregiving book, which is, even when life throws things at us that are certainly no picnic, there are still joy and laughter yet to be found. I'm my mother's caregiver. She was diagnosed with dementia of the Alzheimer type in April of 2004, and my husband and I have cared for her in our home for the past 10 years. It's interesting how our life circumstances can land us in the middle of challenges we did not expect. I've written 2 books, and both were based on experiences that, when I was young, I would not have anticipated for myself. My newest book is a novel about a young woman's first year of teaching in a rural Kansas school. If you like Jan Karen's Mitford novels, you'll like this book. It has that sense of community and lovable characters you'll enjoy getting to know. This book was inspired by my 25 years in the public school system. Teaching was a career I did not envision for myself. When I was very young, I thought I'd be a geologist or maybe an astronomer. And then just a short time later, I threw all that out the window in the name of love and decided to make marriage my full-time career. But somewhere along the way, I became convinced that helping children learn to read was one reason I was put on this earth, and so I became a teacher. And then about 30 years later, my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I became her caregiver. Teaching and caregiving, 2 roles I did not anticipate, but both have blessed me richly. Now, there is another role that none of us like to think about for ourselves, and that is the possibility of becoming an Alzheimer patient. I was asked in this presentation to talk about Alzheimer's disease from the perspective of those of us who are worried about the possibility of a diagnosis of dementia for ourselves or for someone we love. And so I'm going to spend the remainder of my time sharing reasons that we can have at least a small measure of peace of mind about the possibility of facing this kind of life challenge. I'm not going to talk too much about prevention for a couple of reasons. First of all, because our society has become so health-focused, we are constantly inundated with do's and don'ts as far as what we ought to eat and drink and how we ought to exercise. And so there's plenty of information easily available in that area. And you can see in this photo, I've engineered it so that I look like I'm striding along and exercising religiously, which I wish I did, but I really don't. What I can tell you is that research has shown that what is good for your heart is also good for your brain. And so if we follow a heart-healthy lifestyle as far as exercise and diet go, we're doing the best possible in a physical sense for our brains. But although healthy eating habits and physical exercise are good, there are other kinds of exercise that will do us even more good when it comes to preparation for growing older, whether or not we face a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. For example, there are things we can do to make it more likely that if dementia does occur, it won't be the horror we all fear. There really is a phenomenon called pleasant dementia. This is a seemingly contradictory term that first came to my attention in the Mayo Clinic's caregiving newsletter, and when I did internet research. I found that many articles talked about individuals who exhibit peace and happiness as Alzheimer patients. There are accounts of people whose personalities actually improve following a diagnosis of dementia. Now, this doesn't always happen because at least a portion of the symptoms of dementia are due to the specific part of the brain most affected by Alzheimer plaques and tangles, and we have no control over that. However, many sources talked about environmental influences as playing a part, and this offers hope. If you are a caregiver, you need to know that the so-called pleasant portion of dementia is not always evident immediately following a diagnosis during that time that the care recipient is losing independence and the caregiver is struggling with new responsibilities, and both are suffering grief and fear. My first year as my mother's caregiver was certainly a challenge. But almost a year to the date following Mom's diagnosis, things got better. We both came to acceptance of the changes in our lives necessitated by her disease, and Mom settled into a level of contentment that was unprecedented. Mom doesn't worry about either the past or the future, and I know her faith in God has contributed to the ease with which she let go of worry for her own life. Soon after she came to live with us, I found these words recorded in her journal. This is one of those times when I hardly know who I am, where I am, or why. Well, God knows, and when He's ready, He'll fill me in. Mom is philosophical about her lack of short-term memory and has a sunny assurance that her needs will be met. Now, I'm not saying that Mom is never difficult to get along with, because dementia patients have lost so much in terms of their independence and even free will choices that the rest of us take for granted. They tend to try to hold on to at least a measure of control by becoming somewhat demanding, sometimes even sarcastic or rude. But I'm talking about the overall sense of well-being that Mom seems to have, and I'm just saying that this is encouraging. The knowledge that a diagnosis of dementia is not an automatic sentence to misery goes a long way toward easing fear of the future. This is a comfort for those of us who dread the possibility of an Alzheimer diagnosis for ourselves or for someone we love. These are characteristics that will take some of the sting out of growing older, whether or not we're diagnosed with dementia, and I think these are the elements that have allowed my mom to make a successful transition into the role of being an Alzheimer patient and have allowed her to have a high quality of life for the past 9 years, 10 years now since her diagnosis. We'll look at each of these elements in a little closer detail in the slides that follow. They are faith, positive relationships, making a successful transition into the role of being a patient, journaling, good medical and practical knowledge, and effective medication. It is definitely my mother's faith that gives her peace to assume her needs will be met even when she does not understand what's going on. This quote from her journal was written about 5 years into her Alzheimer's disease, at a time when she had already begun to confuse me with my daughter, and sometimes would ask me if I was married or if I had children, even though I'm her only child and the mother of her only 2 grandchildren. And yet she wrote this one day, after I'd become exasperated with her for calling me multiple times throughout the day. My senior mind has a hard time accepting I'm not thinking logically. For years I was responsible and accomplished much. Now, let go and let God. This pen and notebook will occupy my heart and mind. Allow that to be, Anna Ruth. When your senior mind causes problems, try to grasp what caretakers are telling you. Guide me to let go and let others with a kind and compassionate spirit. I pray for this. It is so important to work on relationships ahead of a dementia diagnosis. Get rid of unforgiveness and bitterness, because it is really true that the negative things in our personalities become accentuated as we grow older. And if we have a habitual way of responding to someone who has hurt us, for example, if a wife resents a husband who has criticized her and that emotion of resentment isn't reconciled by forgiveness, in dementia, that negative feeling will transfer to the caregiver, even if the caregiver has never spoken a negative word to the patient and the original perpetrator of the crime is long gone. A dementia patient holds on to emotions and patterns of responding even after the memory of the triggering event is gone. So even if that person who caused the negative emotions is no longer living, that lingering resentment will rear its ugly head to poison a caregiver-patient relationship, because resentment has to have a target. Making a successful transition when life roles change is key to peace and a sense of well-being for both caregiver and patient. The focus of my caregiving book is helping people to survive what I think is the most difficult phase of caregiving, and that is making the transition from past relationship roles into new ways of relating to one another as caregiver and patient. That transition is particularly difficult if you're taking care of someone who used to take care of you in the past, so that there's a role reversal. My mom has always kept a spiral notebook by her chair and now utilizes it as a memory tool. This, along with her whiteboard that lists the date and events of the day and her clock, help her to stay oriented. Now, you don't want to try to teach someone with dementia a skill that's new for them, and so you wouldn't hand an Alzheimer patient a journal and tell them to record the events of their days. It probably won't happen. But if the habit of journaling is established pre-dementia, it can be a great help as a memory tool through the early and mid stages of Alzheimer's. And so if you think you are beginning to have a little bit of trouble remembering, it probably isn't too late to buy a stack of spiral notebooks and begin that habit of journaling. I felt a real push from the Lord to write down the ways that He had provided for my mother and I through those early days of our Alzheimer journey together. And this has served a wonderful dual purpose for me of preparing my children in case I ever have a diagnosis of dementia. It's all recorded here for them. People are unprepared for the depth of emotion they face when a loved one is diagnosed with dementia. There are feelings of betrayal, anger, and resentment, and you can buffer this for them now by helping them to understand that these emotions would be normal, and that when you are undergoing grief of loss of your parent or spouse, as they once were, that you're going to feel angry and you're going to act out sometimes. Prepare yourself also for this, and be prepared to pray your children or caregivers through this stage, because it's at that transition stage that caregiver-patient relationships are either made or broken. When your children are feeling betrayed because you aren't doing for them what you used to do for them, allow them some resentment and anger, and do your best not to take it to heart. It's a stage of grieving, and they probably will come around given time. You know, when our children are toddlers and they throw tantrums and we say it's just a stage. If, Lord forbid, we should receive a diagnosis of dementia, we need to allow our loved ones this stage of resentment. I know I certainly did not behave well toward my mom when she was first diagnosed, but I did come around to a somewhat better pattern of behavior toward her. Here is the URL for my caregiving blog. It's copingandpraying.blogspot.com. You will find there 2 posts that are helpful to caregivers and also for those who are concerned about the possibility of a diagnosis of dementia for themselves. One is entitled, "Where is God in Alzheimer's?" and the other is entitled, "Caregiving Strategies," which lists the medications Mom was given. And of course, these are not recommendations. They're just sharing what has been done for us that has seemed to be effective, and you would need to clear any of those decisions with your healthcare professional. These are the steps we took when my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Please feel free to press pause and to peruse these at greater length. Again, they are not recommendations for anyone else. It's just a sharing of what helped us. At a support group meeting, a nurse who cares for the elderly uttered the most helpful truth that I've ever heard anyone say regarding dementia. The ability to love and to receive love remains to the end of life. Of all the things that Alzheimer's can take from us, it can't take loving and being loved, because where there is love, life really can continue to be good despite a diagnosis of dementia.